Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, welcome to SEAA's April Community Call. If you missed my announcement a few moments ago, we were just waiting for folks to roll in and giving some time just in case anyone needed to fully connect with us. So I'm going to go ahead and just give it one more minute and start at about 12:03. Okay, so it's about 12:03 now, and I said I would go ahead and start with our community call presentation and allow those who are still rolling in to do so. But just to make sure we are able to get through all of the items today, I will go ahead and welcome everybody. This is, again, our April community call. And for this call, we will be commemorating 45 years of Southeast Asian American resilience. So there'll be a little bit more information on that if that is something you're not too familiar with. For those in our community who are very familiar with our resettlement and families, history, and refugee experience, you'll know exactly what we'll be going through in those slides to come and talking through the significance for us. I have with me, I am SEAA Sam, the Director of Field and Transition for SEAA. Alyssa's with me as well, who's our Field Manager. Gina Lee, who's our Field Associate, and I'll just have them also do a quick introduction to introduce themselves.
Hey everyone, this is Alyssa. Like Sina mentioned, I'm SEAA's Field Manager. For those of you who have joined our community calls before, you might know me from being on those. So hi again to those of you returning, and welcome to those new folks.
Hi everyone, Gina here. Really great to have you all on this call. As Sina said, I am SEAA's Field Associate. Started out as a field intern and am now working at SEAA. So as always, really, really glad to be part of this and get to hear from you all.
Thank you, Gina and Alyssa. I definitely want to make sure everyone knows, comprising the three of us, we are the field team for SEAA, and all very excited to be a part of community calls. And just to give a heads up, we are all working remotely for these community calls. As Alyssa mentioned before, for those who have tuned in before, this is a new type of community call dynamic where if we're running into any technical difficulties, please hang in there and with patience for us as we're also navigating putting these community sessions together for you. For also this call, we will be going over other topics, and before we do, which Alyssa will be going into more detail, just wanted to go over a few logistics to keep in mind quickly. If you're just joining now, where you're on mute, we will have comments towards the end, so please do use the chat box to put in your comments and questions, and we will get to them towards the end. And if you're interested in getting any of the resources from this webinar, it will be linked in the chat box, as well as afterwards emailed in the YouTube link. Next slide. All right, for today's agenda, we will be going over 2020 census updates, community resources, and responding to our community needs coming out of COVID-19 impact for our community. And for me, I'm most excited to go over the Southeast Asian American Community 45th Anniversary topics later. So I hope you'll stay tuned in for the whole community call. And we'll close it off with Q&A. So to start off the community call, we usually like to pose a few poll questions just to get to know our audience a little more and see who's there and how best we can respond to the needs of our participants. The first question is, where are you joining us from today? And so you can go ahead and, for those who are joining in on the webinar through the computer or your phones where you have the poll, the question is, where are you joining us from today? And you can select one, East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, South, or other. I'll just give about 30 more seconds for responses. All right, so hopefully you're getting in your responses if you haven't done so already. Go ahead and close that up now and take a look at the results or where folks are joining us today from. Looks like the half of participants are joining from the West Coast, and about a third from the East Coast. There's some representation from Midwest and the South, about equally. And it doesn't look like we have anyone outside of those areas in terms of internationally. All right, well, we're glad to have y'all. Second question we have is, how many CREC community calls have you attended? And the options for this question is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or more. And again, I'll give about 30 seconds for responses. Okay, so hopefully you got to answering how many community calls you've been on with us before. I'll go ahead and close that for the total. Okay, so we have a pretty good amount of new participants. Welcome to CREC community calls. I hope you'll find them informative or help contribute to making them meaningful in the future. We have a bulk majority returning with 4 more calls before. Welcome back to our engaged participants. We have a few folks who have attended 2 or 3, and a good 21% who has attended 1 before. So thank you all for joining us. We're so happy to have you. I'll go ahead and have Alyssa. Oh, I'm sorry, one more question. The next question and our last one is, in what capacity are you joining us today? And the options to the question is community-based organization staff, national organization staff, community advocate and organizer, student, or other. I'll go ahead and give 30 seconds again for a response. All right, we'll go ahead and close that up if you can get in your last responses now. Awesome. Looks like a good half is community advocate and organizers. Great to have you. And smaller amount of community-based organization staff and national organization staff at 14% and 18%. And interestingly enough, good 41% at other. So I would be interested in maybe hearing a little more from you folks at the end if you can respond when we get to Q&A and what other groups, categories you may fit into that is not represented here. So thank you all so much for polling those questions with us, just so we can get a better idea of who's on the line with us and how we can best serve you. Now I will go ahead and pass it over to Alyssa to give some important census updates that we have been working on.
Great, thanks, Sina. So again, welcome everyone. So this section, as you know, for those of you who have joined our calls before, Census this year is a big project that SEAA is taking on to make sure that our communities get counted. So definitely wanted to share some updates that have come out of the Census Bureau as of late. The first thing I want to do is actually get a sense of who on the line has actually filled out the census. So one more quick poll. So yes or not yet. I didn't give no as an option because hopefully everyone feels comfortable enough to get counted. So I'll give folks 20 seconds or so to get their answers in. So about 5 more seconds, final answers. And let's see what we got. Great, so 75% say yes, and the quarter, it's just a quarter left who have not yet. So great to hear that 3/4 of you all have filled out your census, and for the quarter of you who haven't yet, hopefully you get those done soon. All right. So like I mentioned, there have been a lot of announcements that have come out of the census. So let's just set a baseline understanding of the current status. So by now, most households will have received their invitation to reply to the census online or over the phone, and various reminders in the mail. If you haven't responded yet, so the 25% of you who haven't, your mailbox, keep checking it because census forms will still be coming in the mail through the end of this month, and then final reminders will go out at the end of this month as well. The online questionnaire is now live, and you can complete it online, over the phone, or by mail once you get that paper form. And to date, or at least as of yesterday, the self-response rate is hovering around 51%. So over half of the households in the U.S. have responded, but obviously you want to get a complete and accurate count of 100%. If you want to check out your state's or your community's self-response rates, you can head to that link there. And it actually breaks down the national average compared to your state's average or your county's average, and you can see where your state ranks as well. All right, so as I mentioned, there have been a lot of operations updates that the Census Bureau has announced. So in my previous slide, I mentioned the paper forms that are being mailed. So those were supposed to have been mailed by April 16th, but we've extended that to the end of the month. So those will be continuing to come in the mail through April 30th. The final reminder postcards will go out in a wave between April 27th and May 9th, just as the final reminder to get folks to fill out the census. Census Bureau has suspended field operations, obviously due to public health and public safety concerns with COVID-19. And so those won't be at peak operating status until June 1st. Previously, this was set to kind of kick off in April and May. So this has been delayed to June 1st at the earliest. The updated timeline for things like update leave, and that's when census takers drop off paper questionnaires at households and they're updating addresses. That has been delayed to June 13th through July 9th. And non-response follow-up, which is when census takers or enumerators go door to door to households that have not yet responded and help them fill out the census, that's been delayed to August 11th, running through the end of the response deadline, which is now October 30th. That brings me to my next point, which is the response deadline has been extended all the way to the end of October. So Halloween of this year is the final day for self-response, as well as the enumeration of folks who haven't responded themselves. Pending congressional approval, so the Census Bureau has requested these extensions of state population totals due to the president. They've requested an extension to April 30th of 2021 and a redistricting count total due to states extension to July 31st of 2021. There are obviously implications of that delay in terms of how states respond to the redistricting and the time it will take to kind of adjust to those. So we're definitely keeping an eye on that. I think the main thing right now is really making sure that folks know about what to still expect with the Census Bureau and making sure that our communities are getting counted in advance of the enumeration. Since this year with COVID-19, it's not going to be as obviously the robust field operation that we were expecting before COVID-19. Let's see, next slide. So there are some dates that are still under review. So the Census Bureau is consulting with public health officials and local and state officials to kind of coordinate these pieces. So they're still working out the dates for mobile questionnaire assistance. So this is where the Census Bureau would have been at events or grocery stores, places where people gather to help them fill out the census. Those dates are still not determined at this point. Additionally, service-based enumeration. So this is enumeration of the community members who might be experiencing homelessness. They would be enumerated at soup kitchens or shelters. Those dates are still to be determined as well. Additionally, the count of people experiencing homelessness outdoors. So this is where Census Bureau would have folks counted at parks or under bridges. This date is still not determined either. All of this information is, obviously we're monitoring continual updates, but right now these dates that have been determined are on our CRAC census website. So if you go to crac.org/census, you'll find a timeline there where all these dates are listed and what the kind of wonky terms mean. So what is, service-based enumeration or update leave. So you can find them there. You can direct community members there or partners that you work with there, and hopefully that'll help outline all these changes for folks. And I know a lot of you on the call, the 75% of you who have gotten out the count, you might be focused on how to get your communities counted beyond yourself. So one of the things that we like to go over is how to still get out the count given COVID-19 and all of these social distancing measures and stay-at-home orders. So just wanted to share some strategies that our partners or we ourselves have used to still get out the count. So some folks who had plans to canvass, they're now phone banking instead. A lot of the community-based organizations that we work with are also checking in with their community members over the phone at this time, just to make sure that everyone is doing all right. And some of them are including in that kind of check-in to ask if they fill out the census yet. So just an easy way to kind of plug as you check in with folks. Other groups who are delivering food or essential goods, supplies to community members, some of them are including census info in the bags or using census totes as the bags that they use. So that's another easy way to kind of, if you're already doing this work, how to still kind of get out the count while, tending to the immediate needs too. Some folks obviously have had to cancel in-person events. Recently, we had Khmer, Lao, and Thai New Year last week. So the screenshot is from a Zoom virtual Khmer New Year celebration that happened nationwide. So folks have started to host virtually instead. And the last thing is obviously leveraging social media platforms. So we have partners who have done Facebook Lives to make it interactive, YouTube videos because they know that's how some of the elders in their community really respond, TikToks for the youth and the young folks, and giveaways. So here you can see our graphic, which I will talk about in the next slide in more detail. Cool. So this month, we are doing an April census giveaway. All you have to do is tell us why the census matters to you, and we're going to be rewarding 5 folks. So 4 of those folks will receive one of our Made by Refugees t-shirts, and also a bag of Vietnamese coffee from Win Coffee Supply. And our grand prize winner will also receive a Win Coffee Supply Vietnamese coffee kit. So that includes a fin filter and also the coffee as well. You can enter on any of our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. All you have to do again is just like the post, follow us and Win Coffee Supply, and tell us why the census matters. If you also tag your friends, that's bonus entries, or if you make your own post, that's an additional bonus 10 entries. The giveaway ends tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern, and Gina will be announcing the winners tomorrow. So good luck to those of you who have entered. It's super easy to enter. It's an easy way to kind of tag your friends, get them to learn about why the census matters as well. So those are my census updates. If you have any additional questions, like Sina's mentioned, feel free to chat them in the questions function, and I'll be keeping an eye on those, and we'll stick around to the end of the call to answer any that I can. All right, thanks. I'll punt it back to Sina.
Thank you, Alyssa, for all the important census updates and how important it is for our communities to be counted for this census decade. Moving on to our next item of importance for CRAC's shifting work has been around response to our community needs impacted by COVID-19. We'll go ahead and start it off with a poll question just to see where the needs are in your community. So the question is, what are the impacts of COVID-19 that you are seeing in your communities? The options are job layoffs, housing and or food insecurity, anti-Asian harassment or hate crimes, issues with remote learning, continued education, increased fear of ICE. And I'll go ahead and give maybe 20 seconds for a response there. Okay, last few moments, seconds to get in your response to the poll, and we'll go ahead and see the responses. Okay, so it looks like there's some resonance. It's resonating the options all across the board. The majority tied in job layoffs and housing or food insecurity is what is being seen as an impact in our communities. followed up by issues with remote learning, continued education, and then anti-Asian harassment and or hate crimes, with the least amount of impact going to the increased fear of ICE. So that's really useful to know, helpful. And if there's any other areas we missed, feel free to chat that to us as well. In response to those options, we definitely have seen an increase for needed resources in those areas. And so what CREC has done in the immediate need is we've created a COVID-19 resource landing page where if you go to our webpage, CREC.org, the direct landing page is just /COVID/19/resources. And that'll take you to the landing page. But if you just go to our main page, you can see it on the main page as one of the tabs. And it will drop down to include COVID-19 rapid response resources and COVID-19 federal stimulus bill facts and questions. So there's a really useful flow chart that was created there to follow along with benefits of the stimulus package for COVID-19 impact in that tab. Building it out specifically, just to share, there's we have it laid out in the table of contents to include mutual aid networks, in language COVID fact sheets and resources, federal and state by state information where it has been listed for us to include. There you'll find trainings, toolkits, hate crime rapid response pages. There's quite a few different organizations that are fielding information because we know that these cases are on the rise and our communities are definitely impacted by these incidents of hate crimes, which is really concerning. And so built out in the tables of contents will also include with that grief and mental health support resources. We also have added most recently for Sexual Assault Awareness Month, because we also know that incidents, unfortunately, of domestic violence, violence within families, just because our communities are very intergenerational in living dynamics, the shelter-ins and lock-ins from state to state has really increased tensions in some households. So we are adding additional resources listed on our landing page of resources to include sexual assault, domestic violence resources and hotlines, queer, LGBTQ plus folks resources and hotlines, and those who are facing homelessness, in addition to the ones I've listed earlier with immediate needs of mutual aid networks and resources for funding that you may need to look at in terms of loss of job and income. Employment details has really been thoroughly fielded by a lot of organizations coming together to give those information. And so you'll just want to go to the website and click on where it's most pertinent for your needs. And if there's anything you don't see there already listed for our rapid response resource tabs, please do let us know. And there's a Google form link in there where you can go ahead and give us more information on what that resource is and why it's important for us to include it for the community. Go ahead and go for the next slide. And as I mentioned, with rapid response for our community, on top of the resources that we're needing in terms of in-language fact sheets about COVID-19, collecting the translated information, web pages that had resources in Cambodian, Khmer, Vietnamese, Laotian, Hmong, Mi, and Khmu languages, and Karen included was another one that came up. On top of compiling those on our resource page, we've also seen needs come up in other demographic groups, including those impacted such as students. And so our education team are coming together specifically to offer a listening session the first week of May, and we'll present the date once it is confirmed, but we do know that we will be holding a listening session with CRAC's Education Policy Manager, who will be fielding a conversation around experiences, impacts of our college students, if you're getting resources or not receiving resources from your colleges, universities, community colleges, and where the need may be there, and providing more resources and support to our students at this time. And our SVP link for listening session is provided there on the page. And we'll also put out an invitation on our social media and e-blasts about it as well. Next slide. Okay, so getting into this section was really important to me in terms of tying into our current climate right now, where so many people are struggling and facing uncertainty or instability, fear, anxiety, just going through a lot, I anticipate, and our team recognizes in terms of responding to community needs and recognizing that resources are needed, conversations that hasn't had before in terms of where our needs are happening now. I would also like to connect that to our experience as refugees to the US, where in many ways how we were first resettled into the country has many of these very similar type of trauma that mainstream culture is kind of working through right now through the pandemic. And so in commemoration and recognizing the connections here of where we can relate to a time 45 years ago, I think is really meaningful to connect to and discuss, and also celebrating some of our accomplishments and resiliency in where we are still. So going into the 45th anniversary of Southeast Asians community here in resettlement, I'd like to ask just a few questions again to poll a little bit of maybe if there is significance for you. Do you know the significance of the year 1975 for Southeast Asian Americans? Is the question, and response options are yes, I know a lot about 1975's significance. I've heard about it, but am unsure of the significance. No, I've never heard about 1975 significance, or other unsure. I'll give 20 seconds for you to respond. All right, just a few last seconds before we close that poll. Okay, so let's see how people are feeling about 1975. Oh, wow. There aren't any that have never heard of the significance of 1975 participating with us today. That's cool. I guess I thought maybe there might be some folks who weren't familiar at all. So the majority of you know a lot about 1975, at about 79%. So that's great. I think you'll definitely be able to go through the next few slides with me and having some of it resonate with you too. And there's about 11, broken evenly, 11% each for I've heard about it, but am unsure of the significance, and no, I have never heard about 1975 significance. So to our next question, if you are familiar with the significance of the year 1975 for Southeast Asian Americans, how did you first learn about it? And the options are from parents, family, or other relatives, from friends or school, from my own interest, coming across it myself. This is the first, and the last option is this is the first time I've heard of 1975's significance. All right, I'll give a couple last seconds for final answers. Okay, let's see where folks are at with where they first heard about the significance of 1975. You know, I just realized from the first question I had interpreted one of the responses incorrectly, and there are folks on the line who have are just learning for the first time, as this answer poll response is reflective of. So about 18% is hearing about this for the first time, that there is significance to 1975 for Southeast Asian Americans. The largest portion learning from coming across it themselves or being self-motivated to learn at 35%, the 29% from parents, family, or other relatives, and another 18% from friends or school. So that's really interesting, where everybody's kind of come across this. And those who haven't learned, hopefully you'll know a little bit by the time we're done with the community call. Next slide. Okay, just for a little historical context, the importance of 1975, and for those who are very familiar with it, is marks for many. If you can go to the next slide, Tina. Okay, I'd just like to follow along what I'm saying here quickly, and then jump back to the next slide, the first one. So the significance is that on April 17th, 1975, that was the year in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, the government fell in the hands of a regime that was known as the Khmer Rouge, and the killing fields, or what's known as Cambodian Holocaust, ensued after that. On April 30th, 1975, was when Saigon, Vietnam fell, also to the hands of a regime where there was evacuation of American troops from the Vietnam War during that time. And then a little soon after that, in Laos, we have the Hmong, Lao, and other ethnic minorities who were evacuated from Laos, which is essentially when their government also fell to a regime with the evacuation of American troops. So then, if you can go back to the first slide, Gina. So with those important dates, in 1975, around this time, is why it's so significant for our Southeast Asian American communities, because in Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, the three countries that were impacted by the Vietnam War, it was a time where the mass exodus of resettlement first began for Southeast Asian Americans to the United States. And so that's why it's also 45 years this year in 2020 that we're commemorating this history, as well as celebrating the survivorship and resiliency of our communities to continue building and healing from this history. Just a little bit of background on top of that is, in terms of information, if you're not familiar, there was, for the Southeast Asian American community, we're the largest resettlement of refugees in U.S. history at 1.2 million since 1975. And originally, about 3 million of Southeast Asian refugees were displaced due to the impact of the Vietnam War. And since then, now in 2020, the numbers of our population in the community in the U.S. are actually really close to about 3 million. And so in some regard, we can go to the next slide. In some regard, in commemorating the history of it, there is the start of it with struggle and trauma, refugees having to survive a lot of hardship to get families and reunite and rebuild in the U.S. And now we're 45 years later, actually at a population level about 3,000 when we were first displaced. So that many, which I think is a good positive to focus on in moving our communities forward from this history. So just in, we have quite a few more slides, but I do want to give just a moment of silence to those who are on the call and recognize the healing that needs to happen in communities who've gone through trauma like refugees have, and to connect it to our current time of a lot of turmoil, uncertainty, families unable to be together, communities unable to convene, but finding ways to come together and support one another through it, I think is a shared struggle, whether it's a refugee experience or right now going through a world pandemic. I'd like to just give maybe 30 seconds, we did for a poll, just to give a moment of silence for that grieving, healing process and space that's needed for our communities right now. Thank you so much for allowing that space to give remembrance and be connected through silence and support of one another as well as we're moving through this changing, very uncertain time as well. So let's go to the next slide. Within the context of resettlement, there has been a lot of struggles for the Southeast Asian American community, which I'll go over quickly, includes groups such as Jam, Mong, Khmer, Khmer Kampuchea Kram, Khmer Le, Khmer Lahu, Lao, Lumien, Montegarts, Thai, Phnom, Thai Dam, Thai Dang, Thai Hu, and Vietnamese communities. And I just wanted to say as many groups as possible in recognition. And there's many more, I'm sure, minority groups that I am not familiar with, but I am thinking of all of the Southeast Asian communities who have been resettled in the U.S. in these 45 years. And since then, through a lot of disparities, struggles, structural challenges in language barriers, and navigating a whole new culture and institutions for our elders and our parents and for the younger generations who's mitigating and being ambassadors for their communities and families. Growing up really fast, there's been a lot of contributions that the Southeast Asian community has contributed since our arrival. And here's just a list of some of them. One of the most important reasons to remember in terms of our resettlement is that it had to do with the involvement of our countries in being allies to the U.S. during that time in 1975 and leading into 1975. And so that is a direct result of Southeast Asian Americans being resettled in the U.S. as allies during that time. And so not only as war veterans, but also in terms of economic, social, cultural, religious, educational contributions. We have, the list is endless, although it's not maybe reflected in mainstream culture and specifically in the context of thinking of Asian Americans. Southeast Asians may not come directly to mind, but there has been significant contributions on those areas of the American tapestry. And I'll go to the next slide in interest of time. So I wanted to, in celebrating a bit of our history, because even though we're facing a lot of challenges together as Americans now, for Southeast Asian Americans in particular, our community does face still very specific needs. That has been the case since our resettlement. That is a bit unique in terms of the need for family reunification, decarceration, anti-deportation type of advocacy for communities that may not be at the forefront of these movements when we're thinking of those who are impacted. Mass incarceration and deportation, family reunification as refugees still. And so those are all areas right now, as you're following, there's been the biggest executive order right now coming from the administration that will impact immigration into the U.S. And so these are issues that directly impact our community as well. And the areas in which SEAA has been working to address the needs of our community before a rapid response in COVID-19, a world pandemic hit, was in regards to legislative policy type of advocacy. But now that since we're shifting, and we're still able to, we want to still be able to educate, mobilize, provide those resources, but we also want to shift to a timely response to where our community needs are. And so we're still going to be focused on census and civic engagement. We will want to also move to ways to support impacted community members, and this will expand from our previous work of those who are impacted by disparity rates and institutional barriers, those who are incarcerated and living with final orders of deportation, to also now include everyone in our community. And that can be really, really broad to the American experience right now for everyone who are victims or negatively impacted due to the pandemic. And in our community, that will be in ways where we'll need language access to have our community understand and translate materials and information to get that to our community. But essentially, we're all going through right now a really hard time together. And I think Southeast Asian refugees, we have a lot of experience facing these type of challenges where there is family separation, limited resources, institutional barriers that's just, risen to more of the top of American consciousness. And so moving forward, we want to encourage you and others in our community to be able to really support the areas of CRAC's work and engaging in the areas of CRAC's work where we are supporting bills and policies, but also sharing where your community needs are and participating in these conversations with us so we know where we need to best respond to and work with our community. And so I just wanted to mention there's a lot to celebrate in these 45 years. We've seen higher rates also of our younger Southeast Asian American students going to college. Therefore, now we have the issue of them, going through the impact of COVID-19 and, not having graduations and how will they finish their semester and what about their college loans. And so in that regard, there's so much to still celebrate in this moment where it's kind of the two sides of the same coin where we have the problem because folks are in spaces and building our communities in ways that we haven't seen before. So with that, on that note, we do want to educate, mobilize, and honor and celebrate during this time. And thinking ahead to 2025 will be 50 years for our resettlement anniversary. And CRAC will be looking at shifting quite a bit of our strategies and policy priorities to meet the needs of this moment, but also thinking out how best will we be visible and represented and counted and served going into our next 5 years and commemorating the 50th year at that time in 2025. So we're really wanting to meet the needs now and also think out the next few years as well for the community. And you can help us by staying engaged, like I said, and which is perfect time to move to the portion of Q&A with the last 5 minutes or so with our time. And if you have any other questions, you can put it in the chat and we'll be happy to get back to you. We don't get through all the questions. I did want to leave just a little bit of time in case any of you have questions about anything presented. And also to mention for our next, going into May, we will be offering like the student listening session, a series of the type of rapid response community spaces to address those particular needs, such as maybe elders, needs in our community, businesses, organizers. So we know a lot of those issues have not stopped in terms of needs. And we will be shifting to collect more of the updates as we go along from particular topics of our community. And if there's any questions, just a quick reminder on how we want to go about answering is if you do have a question, go ahead and raise your hand. There's a little hand icon you can click, and that will flag us for your question, and we will unmute you and just share your name. And just a reminder to make sure we're respectful of viewpoints, as we're all coming from many different backgrounds. And I'll try to keep your responses at 2 minutes, just to make sure we get through as many people as possible if there are many questions. So I'll go ahead and see from Gina if there's any questions, and also the time being asked.
Great. So we have a question from one of our community members asking, what about incarcerated folks? How are they going to be counted, if at all? So I'll punt that over to Alyssa to talk a little bit about that.
Great, thanks, Gina. Yes, so folks who are incarcerated or in ICE detention, they would be counted at those facilities through group quarters enumeration. And if you check CREC's timeline on that, right now the Census Bureau has announced that that would be delayed until July 1st to September 3rd. And this group quarters enumeration includes places where people live or stay in group living arrangements. So this is nursing facilities, military barracks. If you're a college student and you lived in a dormitory or residence hall or any like student sanctioned specific living, you would be counted in their group quarters enumeration. So you would not be like counted where you temporarily are staying. If you're a college student who didn't live in one of those student specific like dorms or any student specific lease, you would be counted. You would want to fill out the census for your off-campus residents and fill it out for all the residents of that apartment or house. So it's based on where you would live and sleep most of the time, not necessarily where you might temporarily be. But just to reiterate back to the original question, folks who are in detention or who are detained or incarcerated would be counted through group quarters enumeration via the facility, and that would happen in July through September as of right now.
Great, thanks so much, Alyssa. We have a question from another community member asking, do you know of any past or ongoing projects about documenting Cambodian American experiences during 1975? Sina, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
That's a great question. I'm glad that was asked. I actually do know of a few folks. One that comes to the top of my mind is a colleague named Randy Kim, who does a podcast, and I believe it's called the Banh Mi Chronicles, because his family is ethnically Cambodian and Vietnamese. But they migrated here directly from Vietnam, and he speaks both languages and have been collecting stories and interviewing prominent folks in the community who are either organizers, authors, professionals, and I think most recently he interviewed I believe the author of is it Refugee? He's the Pulitzer Prize winning Vietnamese author. Do you know, Gina? But the podcast is called the Banh Mi Chronicles, and I believe it's on like Spotify and Facebook, and he has a website. His name is Randy Kim. There's a few others. There's a lot of like grad students who are doing collection story for their research, and so they're compiling a lot of information from surveys and questionnaires. There's a few folks who are working on documentaries and collecting stories. One is Mike Steve, Cambodian filmmaker in San Francisco, and I believe he's interviewing students at a college in California about their connection to their parents' history and collecting those stories. So I'd be happy to share more about their websites or links of the resources I have for those who are collecting Cambodian stories from 1975 and families impacted, if the inquirer would like to share their contact information for me to stay in touch with.
Okay, and we'll just wrap up with one last question about how did folks hear about the National Khmer New Year celebration? And this individual didn't know about it and wished they were able to participate. So Sina or Alyssa, could you provide some guidance on maybe places to sort of keep an eye out on for these sorts of community gathering opportunities?
I'll go ahead first. This is Sina. I'm really sorry. I wish SEAA could have had a compilation of these virtual gatherings before they happened over the past weekend. However, they did come together really quickly from different organizations across the nation. And so I knew of them mainly because the main organizers are based out of Seattle. So we had Prince Nguyen, who's a former monk, who is a former venerable prince in our area. So I knew he was working with a DJ in Long Beach, Honey, and they co-hosted the virtual 3-day event. So that's how I knew about it, but there were so many events happening nationally to recognize April 17, 1975 for Cambodian Americans, Khmer Americans, and there's, I believe also there are more events happening. And so once the organizers finalize when they will be taking place, I only know of one right now, which is by the Philadelphia Cambodian American Girls Empowerment Group in Philadelphia, and they're putting on an event Saturday to showcase Cambodian dancing and blessing to the community. And I can have SEAA share that out before it takes place on our social media too, so that will be available to folks to connect on. Alyssa, did you want to add anything?
No, I think you covered it.
All right, so I'm just going to wrap it up there since we are a little bit over time. I know there are a couple of other questions, but I'm so sorry this is all the time we have. If you have any other concerns, though, or questions that weren't answered here, please do feel free to email Sina or Alyssa. Their emails are listed here on the screen. Also, feel free to check out our website, the COVID resources that we talked about here today, and any of the other resources that we listed here. And additionally, a last reminder that the handout section does include all the slides from this PowerPoint and from this webinar. And I'll leave it to Sina to close out with any other last words.
Hi, so thanks everyone for joining, and our next community call will be Thursday, May 28th. However, as I mentioned, we are running a special series with listening sessions and other community calls as needed as we go along in May. So keep a lookout on invitations for those as they come along. Otherwise, I hope we'll be having you join us for our next monthly call on May 28th. For those who are celebrating, Happy New Year. And coming up is the commemoration of the fall of Vietnam on April 30th, and so I hope we'll be able to get out information on the Vietnamese community who may be doing events around the country as well next week. All right, I hope everyone is taking good care of yourself and trying to stay connected where we can in support of one another. Have a great rest of your day.